you raise your hand, please, if you feel like you have little to no idea what just happened here? That's what I figured. Don't worry about it. I know that American football is a very, very complex sport with many different things. I'm going to break down a very small aspect of American football for you, and that's the only thing we're going to look at today. In American football, there's one person that's very important, and that's that guy right here. That's called the quarterback. He is the number one player, the most important guy. These guys right here, they're trying to get to the quarterback. They're trying to get to him and tackle him to the ground. And these guys, they're the teammates of the quarterback, and they're trying to protect him. They're trying to make sure that the other guys in white, they're not getting to him. So now when you see that in slow motion, you can see that these guys, as the ball is being snapped, they're trying to break through this wall that the offensive line, as they're called, is trying to create, and the defensive line, the pass rushers, are trying to get to that quarterback. Now, they're creating pressure on the quarterback. Now, what is pressure? So far, we know pressure as a sack, a hit, or a hurry up. Now, what are these things? A sack is when the defensive line, the pass rusher, is able to break through and tackle him to the ground. That is a sack. A hit is when the pass rusher is able to break through, but not quite able to tackle him to the ground, but still manages to get their hands on the quarterback, hit him, but still get him off balance. And then a hurry up is when the pass rushers are still pretty far away, but the quarterback has to get out of his little pocket and then kind of just freestyle it and then still get knocked out like that. Now, the problem is that so far there has been no precise way of evaluating pressure. We just know whether pressure has happened or not. It's either a 1 or a 0. A sack, a hit, or a hurry up has happened, but we do not know a precise way of how much pressure has actually happened at any given point during the pass rush process. So what we're going to do is I'm going to give a very quick rundown of k-nearest neighbors, and then I'm going to tell you how we use k-nearest neighbors to actually metricize pressure. And then we created a whole new metric called predicted motion pressure by predicting the motion of the pass rushers. Now, I know most of you here are actually working with a lot of more complex models like KNN, but I'm going to give you a rundown again in case you have forgotten what KNN is. Let's just assume we have this data set. Two variables, x and y. And those variables, those data points are being classified as either red or blue. And now we have a new data point and we'd like to predict what classification is this data point. Well, k-nearest neighbor looks at its k-nearest neighbors, let's say in this case 5, and says, well, 3 of my closest neighbors are red, 2 are blue, so I'm going to predict that that classification is also red. The really neat thing about k-nearest neighbor in American football is the way that data works in the NFL, because everything is so static. Plays are being repeated over and over again. We're able to use KNN to our advantage. It's a very effective model in this case. Because when we look at pass rush, it's kind of like a dance. It's a tango between the quarterback, the pass rusher, and its closest pass blocker that's trying to avoid for that pass rusher to get through. So we can look at this as a very, very static thing because we have data every 10th of a second available. And we can look at all those features that are important to pass rush. For example, the distance between the pass rusher and the quarterback, the distance between the pass rusher and the pass blocker, the angle between these players, the speed, the acceleration, the orientation of all these players. They're all variables that determine how much pressure is happening at any moment. And KNN allows us to use one of these data points, that static data point, that 10th of a second, into this many n variable space that we're creating. In our case, it was a 17-dimensional space, and throw it in, and allows us to take a new data point, a new frame, and compare it with its n closest neighbors. In our case, it was the 500 closest neighbors, and give us a precise percentage of how likely it is that that frame will also produce pressure. And that allows us to visualize it now at any given point, how much pressure every single pass rusher is creating. Now, that is neat, but there is one problem. This metric doesn't allow us to actually evaluate how good a certain player is acting, because sometimes a player is double blocked. He has 2 pass blockers, so he isn't able to create pressure because he's just outmatched. And that's why we created the predicted motion pressure. Predicted motion pressure, so far we had a frame, we used all of its features, we put it in the pressure KNN, and we got the pressure metric. Amazing. But now what we wanted to do is we wanted to use those exact same features and throw it into a motion KNN that predicts the motion that the pass rusher was going to take in the next frame. And that allowed us to create an entirely new frame, and that frame we're able to put back into the pressure KNN and now create a second variable called the predicted motion pressure. Bless you. And now we have two different values for the exact same frame for a player of how much pressure they're created. For one, the pressure that they actually created, and the pressure that we predicted they would create had they done the motion that we predicted. And the way KNN works is that that motion that the player was predicted to take is kind of the average motion a player would have taken amongst all the other pass rushers in the NFL in that very scenario. And that allows us to compare these metrics. On top you can see the actual pressure that this pass rusher in red created on the quarterback, and in red you can see the predicted motion pressures. The fact that they're very close together shows us that the KNN is actually very, very good in predicting the motion of players, but the subtle difference is the difference between the motion that the player actually takes compared to the average. And what we're able to see is, well, if the pressure is higher, then the player made a motion that was better than the average. And if the pressure is lower, the true pressure, then the player did a move that was worse. And the great thing about this is now we're able to evaluate every single player, regardless of position, regardless of how many pass blockers there were and how much pressure he actually created. Because even if the pressure was low, because he had several pass blockers in the way he wasn't able to get to the quarterback, if he created more pressure than he was predicted to create, he was still an efficient player. And if given the right situation, he'd be able to create more pressure. Now, I know that American football is complicated, but maybe the next time you watch TV and you stumble across something and you see a play like this, at least you know when pressure is happening. Thank you, guys.